All right, joining me now, always a phenomenal episode when he joins me. He is a regular on the SI Media podcast from The Ringer, editor at large, and of course, from the Press Box podcast. He is Bryan Curtis. Bryan, how's it going?
I'll agree to do this podcast, Jimmy, but I want to be heavily involved in the back end.
Okay.
It's my only demand.
Listen, there is a lot to discuss this week. A lot. I mean, usually when I take notes, it's like it fills up 3/4 of the page. I went whole page of notes this week. So there is a lot. It seems like the Bill Belichick story has emerged as the big media story. I thought earlier in the week when I was thinking about this week's pod, it would be Mel Kiper. Now the Kiper thing actually feels a little stale, but I'll start with it since it's a little stale, and then we'll get into Belichick, which is a lot. Obviously, so Mel Kiper took a beating because he spent 3 days talking about Shedeur Sanders. I defended him and said, I didn't realize people took the NFL draft so seriously. Like, it's television and entertainment. It seems everyone forgot that. And I know there's the pearl clutching, like, oh, they didn't talk about, the TCU offensive lineman who got drafted, stole his moment. I thought Mel was doing his job, basically.
I really did too. And I think everyone got off the tracks here with the number 1 overall pick when ESPN immediately goes into a discussion of Cam Ward versus Shedeur Sanders, instead of quote unquote giving Cam Ward his moment, as we heard. And I'm like, you know what? The guy you have sitting on the set who's been your draft expert for 250 years has Shedeur Sanders as the number 1 quarterback in the draft. He has him as his number 5 overall on his big board. So, and also, by the way, Booger McFarland had Shedeur Sanders above Cam Ward. So if you don't want to have this discussion, then you need to go get somebody else, because this is a big story. Like, what?
Right.
And it just, like, to me, Jimmy, really triggered this whole thing about how we judge TV versus how we judge podcasts.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you and I were doing a draft podcast the next day, we would not be like, hey, let's make sure we give Cam Ward his moment for 20 minutes at the top of the show. We'd immediately start debating who made good picks and who made bad picks. ESPN just did that on the air, and everybody went nuts. And again, like, was Shedeur Sanders not a story? Was Mel not proven correct?
Right. 100%.
Over the course of 5 rounds?
Absolutely. And the ratings for Friday and Saturday were through the roof because of Sanders. And I think in partly because, well, let me stop it there. Because of Sanders. Now, if you don't believe that, you're not paying attention. They were up because of Shedeur Sanders. That ties in with Mel Kiper because Mel was on the Shedeur bandwagon and let everyone know it. So I thought everything couldn't have worked. I thought it all worked out perfectly for ESPN, the way it all happened between Mel. This is what I wrote. And if you can dispute it or someone else, the 2 most talked about people for the entire draft from Thursday to Saturday was Shedeur Sanders and Mel Kiper, not one other player.
Yes.
What am I missing?
And again, I think there's a lot of people that sort of wander into the draft in this new era where everybody's a draft nerd, everybody's crushing tape. As you say, it has taken on the air of this sacred institution rather than this thing that only true sickos watch over the course of a weekend. You and I are old enough to remember Mel Kiper, 1994, when he was going at Bill Tobin, the GM of the Colts. Like, Mel Kiper is not somebody who doesn't want attention, like, I remember watching that. You'll appreciate this, Jimmy. I was in high school and I went to Bobby Valentine's Sports Bar in Arlington, Texas to watch the draft. Posted up all day because, again, sickos, right? And I remember that moment happening and I was like, oh my God, it's just so weird to see a sportscaster angry on TV. That was in that era. That was very, very rare to see somebody just exploding on television. But that's always been Mel. Like, this is the idea, is to take draft picks so incredibly seriously, to take what he regards as misses so incredibly hard. And by the way, that's what everybody on the internet's doing. That's why everybody in podcast world has been doing over the last couple of days. So to get mad at him because he rode that story into Saturday, I don't know. It's just very, very funny to me.
Yeah. And what I also found interesting was Mel went on Adam Schefter's podcast after the draft. Does Adam Schefter need a podcast? But whatever.
Yeah, I know. It's always kind of throws me
He's got
off.
enough power. He's got enough power. And said he had no idea he was trending, didn't read any of it.
I believe
Do I believe that? Okay.
I believe he doesn't know
I
it
was
was
50-50.
trending. I think
Right.
he was making good television.
Well, and according to Mel, what he said on the Schefter pod was that he didn't know this was all a big hullabaloo until Seth Markham told him, who's a producer for ESPN. So
Okay.
ESPN was happy about what happened.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people were talking on Twitter like Mel was going to have to retire in disgrace.
Right. There was one of those.
I'm like, what? You want to replace him with Dane Brugler now? Like after he's dominated the draft for 3 days? Okay.
One of those awful aggregator accounts on Twitter was like, breaking news, fans demand Mel Kiper be fired. Be fired. They're probably going to give him a raise after this year. Are you not like, this is not Meet the Press in 60 minutes. It's the NFL draft. The guy was entertaining.
Yes. And look, I know there's kind of a smart draft person consensus out there that Cam Ward was better than Shedeur and that Shedeur really wasn't a number 1 pick.
Right.
And that turned into this kind of weird media critique. All these media people have lied to you and told you that Shedeur's number 1, and now you're overreacting, right? ESPN is engineering his story. Whatever the truth or falsity of that, nobody had Shedeur in the 5th round. Right. Nobody. Right. Nobody anywhere that I have seen. Like he went 139 picks later than what Mel had slotted him at. 139 picks. So Mel was justified. It was a huge story. And even people who were on that bandwagon after night 1, when he didn't go on Friday, when Dylan Gabriel goes ahead of him on Friday to the same team, it turned out.
Right.
I don't know where the complaint is there. I really don't.
100% spot on, because when he didn't get drafted Thursday, it was shocking, but you saw a lot of the people on TV say, okay, no one expected this, but he'll go tomorrow. It's just a matter of when tomorrow, and then he didn't go Friday. And what, people want Kiper to stop talking about that? It's insane. I also think, there's 2 things here. I want to get them both in. So my brain is, the first thing is, I think that the coverage of Sanders leading up to the draft was totally, I think the media had rose-colored glasses because they've been in the tank for Deion for 2 years. Fox, ESPN, and my own company, very questionable coverage of Deion. We gave him the Sports Person of the Year, which I don't know. I thought you were supposed to win. He was 4-8. And last year they lost in the Alamo Bowl, and people are acting like Deion is Vince Lombardi. And Fox was in the tank for him, sending their crew to Colorado for their pregame show when they weren't even airing games. And the Colorado games that aired on ESPN, I mean, Deion should have just broadcasted those games because it was such a homer. So the media was in the tank for Deion for 2 years. So I could see them maybe not looking at whatever the issues were with Shedeur leading up to the draft.
Yes. And Todd McShay, by the way, over at the Ringer, I'm proud to call him our draft expert, or one of our draft experts, really hinted at that before the draft.
Yeah.
He's like, wait a second, why am I hearing about the bad interviews he had at the combine? And why is that not being reported by the NFL insider class? And is that because
they're in the tank for Deion?
Yeah. And I'm paraphrasing him so people go listen to the original, but it's like, is that because people want to be in the Deion business and are worried about not being in the Deion business? And I thought that was an excellent point, and turned out to be true.
100%. The other issue too is you used the phrase earlier about crushing tape. Maybe this is a lesson also, that instead of crushing the tape and getting so hot and bothered over how high someone jumps at a combine, maybe dig into what goes on during the interviews. I mean, stories came out after the fact that teams didn't even have Shedeur Sanders on their entire board. There was, I saw a story. It ended up being from Matthew Berry, Matthew Berry has no dog in this fight. Matthew Berry doesn't care. He's a fantasy football guy. He's not a draftnik. He's not with the tape. He doesn't care about Deion. He's strictly a fantasy football guy. And he had a report from March that 2 different independent people, 2 different teams, not knowing he was speaking to them, both said Sanders was horrific in interviews. Give me that more than, someone ran a 4.4, whatever, 40. I don't even know what they are because I don't pay attention. But that's the stuff maybe people should start paying attention to who cover the drafts. And you mentioned Todd McShay had that.
Yeah, no, and look, I think people knew that, but I think the thing that was hard for people covering the draft to understand was did Deion and company have some kind of deal with a team that we did not understand? You know, this was what we didn't understand is how much leverage they had. Turns out in the end, they had pretty close to zero leverage. But what the bet was is, look, Shedeur's, acting in a way in these interviews that we wouldn't expect. Do they have some kind of leverage? Do they know that they're a top 10 pick? Somebody's going to come in there, right? The Saints, there were all these whispers of different teams, and it just turned out that didn't. And again, I will forgive people because I think that is somewhat hard to understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both know, and this is another crazy part of the story. Every quarterback ever gets overdrafted. Remember Michael Penix going in the top 10 to Atlanta last year? We're like, where did that come from? Like everybody does. He is like the only, one of the few great college quarterback to ever get underdrafted.
I was just thinking while you were speaking, you could speak on this. You're Cowboys. I kept expecting Jerry Jones to take him when he kept falling and falling. Every time Dallas came up, I'm like, well, this has got to be it. Jerry's got it. He'll want the circus. What happened with Jerry and the Cowboys?
I know. Like the guy who was, was basically writing Johnny Manziel's name on the card. couldn't get Shedeur.
Right.
And by the way, I think that would have been a good pick. I'm like, people were talking about this to quote my pal Ryan Russillo, like, he's talking about if Luka were smoking a cigarette while he was walking up the court with the ball, would you still trade him? Like if he were that out of shape? If Deion were like sending signals into Shedeur's helmet while he was playing for a pro team, if Shedeur was like carrying a phone onto the field to film himself for a documentary, wouldn't you still take him in the 4th round? I mean, isn't it still worth a shot?
I would love to know what his interview was like with the Cowboys that they just completely whiffed on.
Maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't interview him.
Yeah. One other thing on the draft, because I wrote about this, I want to get your take. I wrote a column on Friday after night 1. I was shocked that Dan Orlovsky was not part of their draft coverage in any way, shape, or form. Like, this is a guy, you say crush tape, his whole thing. Well, I shouldn't say his whole thing, but he is big on the tape. They have him on every morning show every day talking about these draft picks and the draft. The draft comes and I'm like, I don't see him on TV. And I'm like, oh, maybe they'll, because they put 5 million people on all the shows. I'm like, okay, they'll go to him. And then I see him on Twitter talking into his phone, posting videos. And I'm like, Orlovsky's not part of this. And then they brought over Schrager from NFL Network and they put him on like the McAfee show. I thought that was 2 huge misses for ESPN right there.
So the question for the media, for television particularly right now, is how big of a draft nerd is everybody here in 2025? Like, we know Donald Trump apparently is a draft nerd now, so that's another name in the column.
Yeah.
But like, the question has always been, do people follow this like you and I historically have followed this? I may have slipped a little bit in 2025, but let me tell you, back in 94, I was ordering the Kiper guide through the mail.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting to me, because I remember those old days. If you watch those old footages, like Joe Theismann's on the stage with Berman and Mel, like, then, and here you see it again, Louis Riddick, Booger McFarland, Booger, by the way, studies college football a lot. I know Louis Riddick calls college games. Those are guys not uninvolved, but you talk about, you mentioned Schrager and Orlovsky. Every time I see a Mina Kimes video on Twitter, it's her breaking down a prospect. Ben Solak, same thing. Like, they have all these people. Schrager, who's into the whispers and all that stuff. Like, I just think you do have a lot of talent, but what I think ESPN is weighing is this a general audience, like a Sunday afternoon football game? We know it has almost that many viewers now.
Right.
Or is this a draft nerd audience that, understands the difference between, the guard from Alabama and the tackle from Oregon?
That maybe explains the Orlovsky part of it. But with Schrager, he is plugged in to GMs and agents as well as anybody who covers this stuff. And then they put him on like the McAfee thing that wasn't even on TV. Like, I don't know.
Don't you think that's the Schefter thing? Like, here's our insider. Like, how many insiders are we going to have on the stage?
You could have more than one. I mean,
I'm not opposed to it, but I just, sometimes there's a line, right?
Right.
I mean, part of what you're talking about too is what ESPN has an embarrassment of riches about this thing.
Yes, that is
true. There's other people too we haven't even named who write about it for the website and stuff like that.
Yeah, true. And then one last thing, I guess, just to wrap up, this isn't about ESPN or draft coverage, but the story that ended up coming out about Jaxson Alrech, the son of Jeff Ulbrich, pranking. I found that a really tough one. I was curious to see how everyone was going to cover it, because it's a tough one, because it's obviously the son. The father didn't do this. And I know when I first saw the video, I had like a visceral reaction, like I want this kid to be punished severely. But how can you punish him, and who can punish him? I mean, there's no jurisdiction over him, so it makes it a really tough story. What was your whole take on that mess?
My first reaction was I thought the prank call era of American life had ended some time ago. I don't know if you were a sour shoes person. I was more of a
he
there's a group
called
called the Touchstone Terrorists. I think I
Yeah.
paid attention to at a
Yeah.
younger age.
Sour Shoes called Howard Stern on Tuesday's show this week, and he did
really?
Mad Dog. He did Stephen A. Smith. Yeah, he. So the prank calls on the Stern show is still alive and well. But yes, it was.
Yeah, I'm exactly where you are. I don't defend the kid. I don't defend the act, but I'm also like when I saw people saying they should penalize the Falcons with a draft choice.
Right.
Like, really? And then Mike Florio today is like, well, this whole thing is like the dangers of gambling information. I'm like, okay, I understand this, but like, Jimmy, do you just like close your password protected laptop every day so your family can't get in there?
Exactly.
Like, I mean, that, like, come on now.
Yeah,
Like, I understand sensitivity and information and all that stuff, but like, is this really something we need to like get a think piece out of?
Exactly. It's a kid being stupid, and kids that age are usually stupid, and this kid was stupid. I think this came out right before we taped that the NFL fined the Falcons, and then they fined Jeff Ulbrich. Why are the Falcons being fined? What did they do? The Falcons did nothing. I mean, if you want to say, okay, Ulbrich left his iPad open, okay, but why are the Falcons on the hook for $250,000? They didn't do anything. And my thing is this: I want this kid punished in some way, shape, or form for one reason, not the prank. That he videoed the prank and put the video out.
There was like an admission of here is me doing the thing.
Right. Well, that's why when you said you thought the era of the prank call was over. I don't even think this was a prank call. I think he did this for the video part of this.
It was a social media video.
Yeah.
I do. And I just think we do this thing on the press box called America's Softest Target, where we pick the people in sports or politics who nobody is defending. Like they just, and by the way, and all of us in the media get on our hind legs because we know nobody's defending them. Like this is Nico Harrison, for instance, for the last several months. Like Jaxson Alrech, I'm sorry, he is America's softest target right now because I was watching a little bit of First Take before he came in here, some of the clips, and I'm like, people are just talking about like this is about kids and society these days, folks. We don't need to just slime every college student in America because one college student did something stupid. Like I think there's something
I would push back on you only from the standpoint. It does seem like that age group. I mean, they film everything. It's like, all right, calm down.
I agree, but like serious. But we can only get you can only get so much of a think piece out of this thing.
Right.
There's 100 kids at Ole Miss who are, you know what they're doing? They're just studying, right? They're doing work. They're tweeting about politics, whatever they're tweeting about. They're not doing prank phone calls. Like I don't like. I just think, and even if they are, they're like probably a fairly harmless prank to the pizza man. I don't know what it is. I just don't know that. Again, I would just be careful. I think you can, say like, I'm not defending any of this, but just, I just feel there's a lot of high dudgeon right now because people know that there's no defense of the kid and they're using this to say whatever they want to say.
I just don't like that the kid faces no ramifications, but the coach and the father and the Falcons face the ramifications. But what are you going to do? There's literally nothing you can do to the kid. No one. There's nothing anybody. The NFL can't do anything to the kid. Deion, and literally as you were speaking, Schefter just tweeted, "The pranks keep coming." It turns out that Abdul Carter also got a prank call during the second pick, in which the caller said he was from the Jaguars and they were going to select him with the number 2 overall pick. I don't know if that's the same, if that's Ulbrich or someone else.
And Schefter also had the note that the reason that Shedeur's phone number was in there is because Shedeur doesn't have an agent.
Right.
And that there was basically it was direct dial instead of calling an agent, which you would usually do in these things. So there's other layers to that as well.
All right, let's go to Belichick. It's amazing. This is one of those stories where like you keep getting stuff every few hours, which is interesting. So hopefully we nothing major breaks until this podcast come out. I can't tell you how consumed and fascinated I am with this story because when it first came out, they started dating. My reaction in my head was, that is so fucked up. But you're not allowed to say that. You can't say that because even yesterday I posted a clip of Mad Dog ranting about it, and people, why do you care? Who is he to speak on it? Mind your own business. All that stuff. Well, one, he's a public figure. Two, the girlfriend's causing havoc all over the place. And three, people opine on pop culture. So that's why we speak on it. Now,
yes. And by the way, Instagram photos are being posted. This is not like, hey, we have a private relationship that we would like to keep private.
Exactly. When Bill Belichick, when Bill Belichick was with, what was her name? Linda Holloway, there was no coverage. So this is different. He's getting coverage because
and I think if you look for newsworthiness, what you said, like if you are an informal advisor to Bill Belichick, the head coach who at a public university in North Carolina, you are copied on emails or asked to be copied on emails. I think we've met the criteria there for somebody who's a figure in the news.
Well, let me start with what came out today, and then we'll go back to the CBS thing. So, or it came out, I don't know if it was last night or this morning, but I guess it was I think it was The Athletic and Marchand about she's basically the reason why Hard Knocks got shut down. So if you don't think this is a story that people are allowed to talk about, I don't know what to tell you. But that story seems 100% believable based on everything we've seen.
It does. And look, they have the emails, about the hint about it. Look, the production went all the way to the 23rd hour and then it suddenly stops.
Right.
I do have to say about that story, my first reaction to that was this is pretty normal behavior for a famous athlete or coach to want to be heavily involved. I'm using the Athletics words here in the production of a documentary. This is the way it goes. The idea that some documentarian, even NFL Films, would be able to call Bill Belichick and be like, hey, we're going to send our cameras in there. You're not going to have any final say about the cut of this. Maybe you keep us out of your house. We've seen less and less access at Hard Knocks in recent years. Maybe you keep us out of certain parts of the program or parts of your life, but we're just going to go in there and make a documentary about you and you're not going to have any profit participation or any control. Does that sound like 2025 to you in any way?
No, but but didn't North Carolina pursue Hard Knocks initially?
They may have, but Bill Belichick may have seen this as a way. But again, people, the athletes and the associates of athletes wanting to get in on the documentary. That's just, I hate it as a journalist or somebody who purports to be a journalist, but that's the way the world works. By the way, the other piece of context we should mention here, Bill Belichick was the Isaiah Thomas of the Robert Kraft doc. Bill Belichick just had a very bad experience being in a documentary. They talk about this during the Brady roast. He turned into the bad guy of a documentary that he did not control. So for him to then want to be like, oh, sure, let's do it again. I find that very, very hard to believe that he would agree to that.
Well, that's the thing. From the second I first heard that Hard Knocks was doing North Carolina till it ended, I never once thought Bill Belichick wanted to do that. I said, it's got to be either the school. At the time, I wasn't thinking the girlfriend, but obviously she must have had a role. You'll never convince me this was his idea. He signed off on it. He wanted to do it. I think it was like, he said, okay, well, if you guys want to do this, leave me alone with the cameras, but you could film like whatever. There's no way he was all gung ho about being on Hard Knocks. I don't believe that for a second.
I would find that very hard to believe. I had the same reaction when I saw it. But again, it was apparently like certain people, maybe Belichick himself thought it was close to being done. Then it gets to the end and doesn't happen.
Yeah. And then you also have the aspect of he writes a book. Okay, good for him. He's perfectly allowed to do that. But then, that publishing company has to know that's not a person who wants to go on a book tour, because no matter who does, you can find the biggest fluff interview in the world. If you don't mention Robert Kraft at all in the book, you're going to get asked about that.
Yeah.
Mad Dog's been ranting and raving about if Belichick does an interview, you got to ask him why he didn't play Malcolm Butler in that last play in the Seahawks Super Bowl. Now, you're going to get that maybe from a sports person.
Sure.
But even the non-sports people are going to think it's bizarre that you don't mention Kraft. And according to that email that was published, Bill's all upset. People are going to focus on the negatives. Do you not know how this works at all?
Yeah. And by the way, it's not the negatives, it's the interesting stuff. people don't want to do leadership secrets of Bill Belichick in an interview.
Right.
If you had him on here, I mean, maybe you would touch on that, but you would want to ask him stories about the Patriots.
Right.
Or stories about his life. And I didn't, and by the way, I saw that CBS thing cast as a softball interview. I thought that was an excellent interview because they did a very fun thing where they'd just like put up an Instagram photo and be like, what kind of reaction did you get to this? Just real deadpan questions about him and his life and about Bob Kraft. And I thought that was great. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting piece.
Well, that's the thing. This was CBS Sunday Morning. It was not 60 Minutes. And I would not use the word fluff, but CBS Sunday Morning is lighthearted. Would that be a fair? They're not trying to grill people on CBS Sunday Morning.
That's true. But Tony DeCoppel, who did the piece, used to work with me at Newsweek. Actually, he's a real journalist. Right. He's not, celebrity interview guy, though. He does the morning show on CBS. So he knew what he was doing.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
no doubt.
Here's the other thing, Jimmy. The camera.
He was smiling throughout every question he asked.
Did you notice the camera too? The way they took the shot of Belichick and Jordan Hudson.
Yeah,
that felt very planned, right? Like they knew that she was going to be the story, and maybe even just the one question about how'd you guys meet. They knew they wanted that reaction shot.
Well, right, because after you watch the clip, it was obvious to me, at least. I'm sure it was to you and people who pay attention. It was clear that she tormented them, and they figured, okay, we're going to edit this in a way that's going to sort of give you that she tormented us without fully saying she tormented us. Then it comes out after the fact that she made them wait 30 minutes. And I think CBS actually saved her because the report from TMZ, so you got to, maybe 50-50 it, was that she butted in a bunch of times, but they only showed the one time that she butted in.
Mm-hmm. But it made the point, pretty effectively, right?
Well,
Again,
the edit,
we're not talking
edited
about
that
how we
piece,
met, okay?
Yeah, whoever edited the piece from CBS deserves an Emmy because the editing was perfect.
Yeah, can we get them in the sports Emmys next year? Can we grandfather them into the editing category?
I would love to know. So is Bill, is he supposed to do a media tour to promote this book? I mean, clearly he started one with CBS.
I would think if you're him, it's going to be a little less than, your normal, Connor tour. I think fewer and more select hits. No offense to Ian. But I think, I think he probably in his mind that's the one big TV thing he was talking about in that email that he was doing Susie Welch's podcast. Is that right? I would think things like that,
Right.
Friendly encounters. I'm trying to imagine like Bill on The View. What are the other places you sell books now? If you're somebody super famous.
Today Show, the Today Show still has some juice.
I could see him doing that. It's more Michael Strahan on Good Morning America, like that.
Kimmel or Fallon.
They played each other in the Super Bowl, right? Strahan and Belichick. You could see that. Late night show, sure. You could do. Yeah. I mean, he would probably agree to like 3 of those tops.
Yeah. If you could pick one person to interview Belichick, who would you pick?
They would actually get stuff out of him. It's
hard not crumble and be intimidated by him.
See,
because if someone has to say to him, Bill, there's a narrative that's growing that you can't have success without Tom Brady. Who's got the balls to ask that question?
Oh my God. I mean, so my boss is probably my number one draft choice here. In addition, just because I think he knows the Patriots stories pretty well.
Right.
But it would be really interesting to see what you'd ever get from Bill. And like, even if he agreed to like an hour and a half long podcast interview, like what you would get. I almost think like an outsider, like a Mark Maron type, weirdly might get more out of him because it might come at it from more gentler. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, like I said, I think my boss would win Bill Belichick interview prospect.
But would Bill ask him? Bill would ask him what happened to Malcolm Butler. Bill would absolutely ask that question.
I just think he'd be very well versed in the story.
Yes.
The Patriot.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about who would get. I don't know. He could. I could see him going on that. He'll go on NFL Network too, because they're never gonna make anyone look bad.
They will talk about but even they're gonna ask questions about the Patriots. I mean, I think, and again,
not
that's
negative.
Just part of the deal.
They don't do negative. They're not going to do negative at NFL Network.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see where he lands. with this book tour. All right, a couple of other things here. I had playfully mocked, but I am sort of being serious. When Amazon got the NFL, they hired 1,000 people, and now they're doing it with the NBA. I was trying to see who has NBC hired and who has Amazon hired. Amazon now they have Ian, which I don't think they've officially announced, but everyone knows Ian's going there. Harlan, Stan Van Gundy, Steve Nash, Dwayne Wade, Candace Parker, Dirk Nowitzki, Blake Griffin, and I'm leaving people out.
It's a cast of thousands.
If you want to get a job in sports media, you need Amazon to have the sports property because they hire 1 million people.
Yeah, or at least improve your deal somewhere else.
I think it's interesting that they're going to have Ian and Harlan. Who's going to be the top dog there? It's obviously Ian, but
yeah, I mean the Harlan thing is very interesting to me just because he's the number one guy at Turner, and that's like kind of was thinking about that the other day because it's like somebody whose style is as different as Kevin Harlan's is often does not get to become a number one guy.
Right.
It's like that's just kind of an interesting little part of this. Yeah, to me, like the NFL studio at Amazon feels a little overstuffed.
Yes.
I just feel like you don't totally need that many. I mean, you got everybody at the desk and then Michael Smith, and then you're going off to all these people, and you're like, I mean, to me, when I heard Steve Nash and Dirk, especially since they played together, I'm like, that's cool. That sounds fun. I think to me, the cool thing
the initial one was Taylor Rooks with Blake Griffin and Dirk. And now Nash, I think, happened this week. So
yeah,
they just keep adding.
The cool thing to me about it is when you just bring in different people, when you bring in different voices. Like I really like that. Yeah. Because I think sometimes when you have somebody like an Amazon come in, Fox back in the day, they just look around, they just pick different voices. Like Dirk's not on a pregame show, now he is. Oh, well, that would be cool.
Right.
The booths seem similar-ish to me, at least the outlines of what we've seen when you're talking about Stan Van, you're talking about Reggie over at NBC, right? Like, that's kind of NBA now, but that looks like they can do something interesting with a pregame show.
I'm interested in seeing Nowitzki and Blake Griffin. I think they'll be good together. I was a little disappointed NBC went with Reggie as their lead analyst. I thought, I don't think he's great. I get it, the name appeal of it, but I thought NBC had a real opportunity there to do something different. But as you know, I feel like networks don't really want to do things differently. They want the same.
Do you have a name in mind? Because I think it's hard. I think NBA analyst is maybe the hardest thing to fill in media. Like there are plenty of people you and I could name, but like who's the great one out there that you think could be?
The problem is the best one out there is now a coach with the Clippers.
That is a problem.
That's the problem. And the NBA wouldn't probably approve it. So
Tirico and Van Gundy would be amazing.
Amazing.
I would love that. But I think the NBA thing is hard. Like, because whenever people complain about Reggie and they complain about people, I'm like, and I say this not as just as out of curiosity, it's like, who would you put in? Are you ready for Dwayne Wade to get the big job? Are you ready for Jamal Crawford to get the big job? Yeah. And then they go, I don't know. And then you're like, well, then who is it?
I think when I think about this in my head, the only conclusion I come up with is maybe it's because of the pace of the sport, where in the NBA, it's really all about the play-by-play person. The analyst doesn't get as much time as in the NFL, where I think it's 50-50 play-by-play person and analyst, where in the NBA, it's like 85% play-by-play guy, 50 play-by-play person, 15% analyst. But to me, I feel like there are so many great analysts there are a lot of great analysts in the NFL with, Aikman and Olsen. We could go through it. In the NBA, I feel like, where are they?
Yeah.
Doris.
Look, if we were doing our list of play-by-play guys right now, it's a big list,
Yeah.
Green, Ian, Harlan, Ryan Ruocco. Like there's a lot of really great people you want to hear call a game.
Absolutely. But the analyst is not
if
there.
you did the analyst list, you're just like, okay, a lot of them are quite good, but it's just like, are you looking forward to them calling the game the same way? I don't think so. But I think it's what you talk about. I just think structurally it's not an analyst game. It's a play-by-play announcer's game.
Yeah. I don't want to sit here and act like I'm all outraged and offended because I don't watch hockey, but TNT doing playoff games remotely, playoff games. I don't want to go Jim Mora. What?
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I mean, I guess shocking may be the wrong word, because we've seen a lot of networks dabble in this,
Right.
including in big events where you're like, really? That's remote? I mean, but playoff
Playoffs.
hockey is, yeah, I'm really
That's bad.
shocked, especially because what will defenders of hockey tell you? It's a great arena sport. It doesn't
Right.
come through on television, but it's great in the arena. So now you're
And the
taking the
playoffs are
announcers out of
great.
the arena. Yes,
Right.
and the playoffs are fantastic.
Right. And what I don't like it. Listen, if you come out and just say we're trying to save money, okay,
Which is the
terrible, but
reason.
I can respect. No, but they said there was some convoluted fakakta thing about it had to do with going to Canada or Western Canada. Well, how come ESPN can send their people? There's no problem. They were trying to say logistics with
We don't have
Canada. Like,
planes that go to Canada.
what? Just say we're trying to save money. We're being cheap. We don't care about
Well,
the
it's
sport.
hockey.
Nobody
We
watches
knew
it.
they were Canadian teams. Like that was
Right.
not a newsflash.
Yeah. Come out and say our playoffs can't even draw 1 million viewers and we're being cheap to save money on this contract we're paying. No, we can't get planes to Vancouver. What?
Yeah. There's something about
Just such a terrible. It's just such a terrible look. It's a terrible look. That's what it is.
And Turner's whole sports strategy now seems to be like, let's just get just enough things to stay on the cable tier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just enough events that if you're a sicko, if you're that person watching the 5th round of the draft, even without Shedeur Sanders, you have to watch, have to have it. Right.
How about
total
Yeah. How about when they made poor Ian give the resume of David Zaslav since losing the NBA? Wow, that was rough.
Our media man of the year.
And he even inquired the French Open.
He will not be being honored at the Sports Emmys this year.
Yeah.
Not be receiving any kind of awards that I know of.
What else did I want to get into here? I think it's been an under discussed, if that's a word, story. And maybe it's just for really inside nerds like us. It's only one round, but the end of local broadcast networks, cable networks, getting to call NBA playoffs in the first round.
Yeah.
Beginning next year. They're all national. We're taping this Wednesday afternoon. We had that great Pacers comeback against the Bucks on Tuesday. And I went right away. I try to find the local feed to hear the announcers losing their minds and going ballistic. And yeah, they only get to do one round. So it's not like you're losing them throughout the whole playoffs. But, here in New York, we have Mike Breen, around the country, people love their local broadcasters, but starting with next season, first round, national only, Amazon, NBC, ESPN, ABC, no local telecast. I know ESPN, Awful Announcing did something on Walt Frazier. He's very upset. This is it for him doing playoff games. I think it's a big, for people like their local broadcasters, and, it would have been nice to get, it's one round. Can we throw them the bone? But I guess not.
When you're making $7 billion to the new NBA deal, there's only so many bones to be thrown around. But I agree with you. It's, the Ian and Breen, Ian was another one, right? With Yes, because you'd always be like, wait, where isn't he on TV?
Yes.
Oh, wait, he's doing Nets games. But
yeah,
it really does. I saw Mark Falwell, who does Mavericks games, right or tweeting about this the other day. Like it's tough for them, right? Because that's the cherry on the sundae at the end of the year that you get to do playoffs.
Exactly.
And now you're essentially doing what, like, other, I guess the other sports do, where you're just like, oh, we're out, postseason begins, our season is done. Yeah. And everything, like the story too, right, is the NBA has just put everything possible into national TV contracts. Playing
I get
first
it.
round
and
in-season tourney, like they want to create things for people to buy. And to Adam Silver's credit, he's been successful about that.
This sort of reminds me when streaming first started, where people like you and I and others in media, we've mentioned, okay, this is it for the local broadcast. But 1 year from now, when there's no local broadcast, I know everyone on Twitter is going to be like, why isn't this game on MSG? Why isn't this game on Yes? Why is this game on Nesson or whatever, Boston, whatever? It's like when streaming started and people didn't believe that first NFL playoff game with the Chargers was going to be on Peacock, and then everyone's like, where's the game? It's on we've been saying this, but
yes,
we'll see what happens next year.
I will say that I think local announcers, I think we actually probably hear them more now, because two things. There's always an awful announcing clip up right afterwards with the local team calling the game. There's you hear it on Sirius if you're driving around. You hear the local radio broadcast across the country. Like that technology has really changed and made those people more accessible too in different ways.
I don't know if people understand how good Sirius is. I mean, you get the local of every team. I know they have it for baseball. It's a tremendous feature.
Sean Grandy was telling me about this one time. They like really changed people's, interactions with the public. Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, is somebody driving around LA can just hear me, at night without even really trying. Just there it is.
I have two more. I feel like if I post this podcast and I don't mention Shannon Sharpe, people are going to say, why didn't you talk about Shannon Sharpe? I really don't have much to say about it because what happened. I have no issues with ESPN did. I know some people say, oh, maybe they shouldn't have had him on the air that first day. But when something's new, they need to get the facts and find out what's going on. When more things came out, he said he took a leave, but we all know ESPN said, please stop coming on our network. And I don't think he's going to be back on ESPN or television. That's sort of my take. I don't have much else to say about it. What about you?
One thing about ESPN's reaction, I think, is, even Stephen A. in that very interesting, if that's the right word for it, 20-minute, the first of two, by the way, because he came back and talked about it later, right after Sharpe stepped away as well.
Right.
But said that he was not aware. I mean, I believe he was talking about that second day that Sharpe was on the air, which is a Tuesday, if I'm getting my days right.
They usually have him on Monday, Tuesday. Yeah.
And the fact that he wasn't briefed as somebody who is both the host of First Take and an executive producer of First Take is pretty shocking to me and makes you wonder like what was happening at ESPN. Even if you're in fact-finding mode, right? Even if you are, trying to figure out what's happening and there are lawyers involved and a lot of allegations and on very serious allegations and all that kind of stuff. It's a little weird to me that he didn't know. And the whole ESPN, and again, I know ESPN just doesn't do statements about anything anymore, as far as I can tell. There was a very, very, very short one eventually after Sharpe stepped away on this, but I found that very curious.
I think, so you find it curious that
we didn't know that, you're like, this is your show. This is, and if you listen to that Stephen A. thing, he is obviously taking it very serious. He said, take it very seriously, talk to Jimmy Traina about all that kind of stuff. I just found that particular detail to be, I don't know.
Maybe the higher ups didn't want to take a chance on getting swayed by Stephen A. one way or the other.
I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah. All right. One more, and then I have one non-sports thing at the end here. Marchand reported, I think it was last week, or he may have said this on his podcast, that he doesn't think there's a ton of interest in Aaron Rodgers from the networks. If Rodgers were to retire, it looks like he's going to play for the Steelers, but
I've heard when he retires,
you've heard the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I am blown away by that because if there's one thing these networks like in the NFL is big names. So tell me what you've heard and expound on that if you don't mind.
Well, I think he was being sized up as that guy for a long time. When you talk to people, there's a lot of people there were multiple people I talked to that thought he would be more of a studio guy just because of his kind of manner, that he would pop there more than a game analyst.
I had heard from someone who would definitely know that he was bound for the Fox studio at some point, but go ahead.
I mean, that seemed like, a logical destination at some point, but after the Jimmy Kimmel stuff, and that was following 6 months of other headlines or a year of other headlines. I'm getting my dates confused here, but when I talk to people, they were just like, no thanks. And also I think what's interesting too is there's probably, to be fair to Rodgers, a secondary question here is how interested would he be in that now? Because he's gone on a path where he does not seem to like he wants to be a mainstream media guy, to put it bluntly.
That's true. I think he'll definitely be involved in some form of media, but maybe the mainstream media is not for him.
I could see him wanting to do his own podcast and wanting to do his own thing and just not wanting to. Let's say you get Aaron Rodgers. You could get him as in a booth or on a pregame show, and you got that football mind of his. You got that, guy who was willing to say things just about football.
Right.
Putting pandemics to the side for a second, Jimmy. He was like the mind you wanted on football.
Yeah.
I think you just I don't know that the network would want to sweat out what he would be saying outside of their, building. And I don't know that Aaron Rodgers honestly would want to have to deal with those kind of questions every time he says them. Well, how does this reflect on your employees? I really don't.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if there's one thing that networks who are in bed with the NFL love, it's all-time great quarterbacks and big names. So the fact that there would not be much interest in him is fascinating to me. Everything you say is accurate. Like, yeah, CBS or Fox or NBC can't have him in the studio on Sunday breaking down Joe Burrow's arm angle, and then 2 days later he's like, "Well, I don't know if kids should be vaxxed." I mean, they're not going to want to deal with that. Yeah,
I think so. I just think it's just too many headlines. And like I said, he wants to make headlines. That's the thing. Like he wants,
right. And he will. Yeah, he will. I mean, if Vegas was offering odds, I mean, Aaron Rodgers having a podcast would be minus 50,000.
It'd be off the board.
All right. Last thing, and when it comes to media, Mel Kiper, Bill Belichick, all the stuff we've talked about, none of it grabbed my attention or had me more blown away than a story that had nothing to do with sports. And I know you saw it, and I would love to discuss it for a minute. And that was the end of 60 Minutes this week. Now, this is nothing to do with politics. This is nothing to do with left, right. But to have Scott Pelley go on 60 Minutes and do a tribute to what was his role? He was an editor,
coordinator, executive producer, I believe executive producer.
Yeah.
Bill Owen.
And say, part of the reason he left is because Paramount's trying to merge and we need the approval of the government. Was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen on television. Am I overblowing this?
No. And there's been a lot of 60 Minutes moments in our lifetime that have been amazing.
Yes.
Nothing like that. Him just, and in the most old-fashioned TV way you can imagine, sitting in a chair and looking into the camera.
Right.
And just I always think of, when we think of the high watermark of bashing your network bosses, I think of Letterman, of course, especially at NBC, especially at the end. But man, that was different tonally and everything in terms of everything.
For sure. Do you think, because when that happened, then I start going into that mode of who knew, who was surprised by this at CBS? Again, when Pelley was saying about the journalistic integrity and stories and this and that, I was like, okay. But when you say we are in the middle of trying to have a merger or a sale, I forgot what it was, and we need to get the government's approval. That's a remarkable thing.
Our bosses need the government's approval. So they are very sensitive to what we are saying about Donald Trump on this program. Yes, I'm trying to remember. I can't quote chapter and verse of the media newsletters I read, but I believe that people at CBS knew they were going to say that.
Okay.
If not, good. I don't know if Sherry Redstone knew they were going to say that, but people at CBS knew they were going to say that.
Yeah.
Or say something, address the matter.
My jaw was on the floor when I watched that clip.
That's amazing. And it's 60 Minutes is one of those shows that feels like it should have aged out a while back. And I think some of the lighter stuff on that show feels to me just kind of felt a little bit like Real Sports at the end, where it just felt a little dutiful. But when they do a political piece or, a big world events piece, they can still grab everybody by the lapels like they did when Pat Summerall was doing a read for them back in the day on CBS. Late 80s, early 90s. Followed by Murder, he wrote.
Yeah. I still, whatever it is, that first or second week of the NFL season, when you watch a CBS game and the clock starts that tick, 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 and you got Nance or Ian saying, 60 Minutes coming up after this, except on the West Coast. That's when it feels like the football season has started in a way.
It does.
It's a staple.
Isn't it funny things that have been part of our sports lives that have nothing to do with sports?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Just because we've heard those words on a late afternoon CBS game our entire lives. Yep. And they just kind of get, I remember Marv Albert used to be joking about I'd read so many NBC promos during a football game that the show would probably be canceled by the time the promo was over. But 60 Minutes lives in whatever form.
Yeah. I'm curious to see if there's any fallout from what Pelley, I guess there would have been by now. So I guess they're in the clear.
I mean, you don't typically, do that to your corporate bosses on television.
Yeah. Exactly. On their
If you did
network.
it in the newspaper, that would be a big deal. But on the show,
Yeah. We had, I think it was with you. Was it another guest? I think it was with you. We had talked about once when Dan Rather walked off the CBS News because the
yeah,
US Open was running along. And I actually
tennis.
I had about 3 or 4 people message me and say, never knew about it. Watch the clip on YouTube. Unbelievable. Thanks for mentioning that. Like,
It was an amazing moment, and it was one of those moments where like sports and news, like who was king, what was more
right,
important, and
right,
that's what Dan was objecting to.
right.
With
And
sports,
you might remember this better than me. It wasn't like they were dark for a minute. Wasn't it like 6 minutes or something, or
yeah, several
16
minutes,
or
definitely. And he could not be located because he was mad that tennis was overrunning, and then tennis ended, and they couldn't find him.
yeah. If anyone doesn't know that story, go on YouTube and just look up like Dan Rather or US
Well,
Open. He just
one of
left.
the biggest stories of that period of time. It
Yeah,
was huge.
I love
Imagine that happening today.
Yeah. When you say the battle between sports and news, I automatically think of it was so cheesy, but I loved every single second of it. The Late Shift, the HBO movie that broke down like the Letterman, Leno late night thing. And Leno had that producer. Oh God, what was her name? I can't think
Helen
of her name
Kushnick.
now. Helen Kushnick, played by Kathy Bates, who was great. And she was mad that the convention was running long, and so there was a battle between news and entertainment. I love that whole deal. Anything
Great
with
Bill
fighting,
Carter too. I love it.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's one of my faves.
Yeah. The movie is like, it's weird. It's cheesy, but good.
Yeah. I remember Letterman complaining that he did not have red hair in real life. Like the actor.
How about when Dave had the actor who played him on and then bumped him? Remember that story? That's another one for the YouTube out there. So
Letterman had
HBO
so many
does
rattle moments. It's hard to keep track of, Shirley MacLaine, they were Cher, if I remember correctly. Quite a few.
There's another thing from the old talk show days that doesn't happen now. Guests used to get bumped. They would show up. They'd be at the studio in the green room, and Dave would go over with the A-list guest, and then the other person would have to go home.
Now it's just the Jimmy Kimmel, Matt Damon joke.
Right. Exactly. But Dave so the actor who played Letterman in The Late Shift, which was an HBO movie, was on Letterman's show, and then Dave bumped him and didn't get to him. And it was a whole hullabaloo back then. So good times. Oh God, those are the days. Now we deal with people getting mad about Mel Kiper.
There we go. I know.
All right, Brian.
What has society come to? I'm going to be like these Jaxson Alrech people. What was happening to the kids these days?
Oh, the reaction to Kiper was just, I still was like, what people are just, what are people? Calm down.
Mel. It's Mel. This is what he does.
I haven't seen. I would have liked to have seen a ratings breakdown between ESPN and NFL Network.
That would have been interesting.
But I haven't seen that. All right, Brian. Appreciate you coming on as always. This was a good one because there was so much stuff. So we'll be in touch. We'll have you on soon. And thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, as always, Jimmy.